Hi everyone, I'm Ian Bremmer, and this is your GZERO World. I'm actually here in Washington, D.C. this week, and in a bit I'm talking to Senator Cory Booker, member of the Swamp in very good standing. We're going to talk about his role in a leaderless world, this new spirit of bipartisanship, and do we still believe in democracy in this country, and should anybody else? But first, the GZERO World this week. And let me start, since we're in Washington, with DACA. No, not the capital of Bangladesh. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Some 800,000 Americans, not legally citizens. They weren't born in the United States, but they did grow up here. They were brought here as kids. And economically, they're extremely valuable to businesses all over the country. But Trump says it was a personal dilemma, needed to make these legal as a rule of law in the United States, and so he's given Congress 6 months to get it done, or he's going to have to do something himself. Problem is that spirit of bipartisanship on the debt limit isn't going to last 6 months. It's not going to last 6 hours, frankly. And so as a consequence, the end of this period, the Republicans are going to demand a deal on their terms. The Democrats are as well. It's very hard to square that circle. Ultimately, Trump gets to blame both. Politically, I suppose that's a win. From a policy perspective, not much gets done. That's particularly true because we've got multinational corporations in the United States that are very powerful that really want these people to stay. We've got Microsoft saying they're going to stand in the way of implementation by the Trump administration to protect these people. We've got Tim Cook of Apple saying the same thing. That's a fight ultimately Trump really isn't prepared to fight. And so as a consequence, I don't think these guys are going anywhere. To North Korea. Trump, asked by the press corps, are we going to war? Said, we'll see. Stay tuned. Next season. But, you also have UN Ambassador Nikki Haley saying that North Korea is literally begging for war. Technically, not true, though a great speaking point. Then says, we're running out of road. There's no more road for diplomacy with the North Koreans. Technically, not true. This is not the Apollo missions. Failure is an option. In fact, it's something you kind of embrace when you're dealing with the North Koreans, especially on the back of them testing now a hydrogen bomb. The North Koreans want to show very clearly to President Trump he has no fist in his glove, and that him pushing around North Korea is not going to lead to any agreement at all. The Chinese are running out of runway to push the North Koreans themselves. They could cut them off in terms of oil. They're certainly not about to. They don't want the country to fall apart. What's really interesting this week is the Russians are starting to be the biggest block for President Trump, saying that they would actually veto an embargo on oil to North Korea at the United Nations Security Council. Why are they doing that? The Chinese are more important to the North Korean economy, but they want stability in the region. They're just trying to calm this down. The Russians want to really undermine a U.S.-led order, so they're pushing a lot harder. It's going to be a big challenge for Trump going forward. Let's turn to Russia for a second. U.S.-Russia relations were supposed to get a lot better under Trump, right? That was the one guy he really wanted to get on with, Putin and Trump. Made a lot more difficult by a lot of missteps and by the investigations that are ongoing. We also saw that the Russians kicked out almost 1,000 workers, some Americans, even more Russians, in the American embassy in Moscow. Now in the past week, tit for tat, the Americans closed the San Francisco consulate of the Russians, as well as 2 trade missions in Washington and New York. In San Francisco, this beautiful mansion the Russians occupy, we suddenly see black smoke pouring out of the chimney. The fire department shows up. The Russians say, no need to come in, there's no fire, we're just burning documents. If it had been white smoke, that means they would have had a new pope. Fortunately, that didn't happen, just black smoke. For now, we're fine. But the big news of the week is that Putin came out and said that Trump was not his bride and that Putin was not Trump's bride or groom. That level of gender bending in this relationship between 2 of the world's most powerful figures is something I was really never prepared to visualize in my life before, and now I'm stuck with it for at least the entire week. Anyway, finally, let's move to Kenya. I knew you know I was going there. We've got big elections that just happened in Kenya, and they're being unwound by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, not our Supreme Court, the Kenyan Supreme Court. The funny thing is that the Americans, the Europeans, and the African Union were all observers in the Kenyan elections. They all said it was fine, probably because the Supreme Court in no country in Africa has ever overturned an election before, so they figured, nothing we can do, let's not pay much attention to it. The fact is that rule of law in Kenya is becoming a bigger thing. It's one of the better run countries in Africa, and the head of the Supreme Court right now is a national hero in that country. Kenyatta, who you can remember the name because it begins with Kenya, is the president, and he's running again. Incumbents are always powerful, and he's actually dealing with this new election. It's kind of a win for rule of law. The big deal is that there could have been a lot of violence here if they hadn't ended up running a new election. 10 years ago, hundreds of people died in Kenya. This time around, let's hope we can get through it peacefully. Still, the willingness of the incumbent president to use dirty tricks and influence to stay in office is pretty strong, and ultimately likely stronger than the Supreme Court. So it's a win, but it's only gets you so far. And for this week, that's your GZERO World. It's all new.
This is new. This is the first time I've used it.
First time outside of our office filming coworkers.
Okay, there you go.
Not filming coworkers.
Here with my friend Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, and
First of all, thank you for coming. You've come to my office. Usually we're not dressed formally when we're hanging out.
I'm glad you consider this fun. It is a suit,
For you,
right?
that's
For
a
me,
step.
this is a step in the right direction.
I just want to say, I will say this on the record. You can use this against me in the future. But you are such a great mind on global issues. You've been a valued friend. I savor our conversations when we have them. So I just want to thank you for being such a citizen of the world and so rooted in the best interests of this country.
Buttering me up at the beginning of this conversation
That's
is the right way
That is a
to
tactic,
go.
man.
It's the right way to go. So, I mean, look, a lot of things to talk about, but given that we're here right now, there's suddenly a spirit of bipartisanship.
It's been an interesting 48 hours. May inshallah, Bizrat Hashem, may it grow into much more.
You're trying to undermine it just by saying it, yes, I can tell. What do you think this, I mean, you could say it's a positive step, but at the same time, we've solved absolutely nothing, right, in terms of structural issues.
No, I mean, so economically, first of all, the fact that the debt ceiling is has become a continuous political issue, that the United States should honor its debts, things we've already spent. It's the most irresponsible faux crisis, manufactured crisis I've ever seen. In addition to that, the way we budget, no state government, and when I was running my city, we could never do things like this. There's no planning. We've lost hold of regular order here, regular budgeting here, and it's a travesty what's going on the way we're planning. If we just were running this like, America Inc., like sitting around as board of directors, we would be liable for shareholder lawsuits the way we're running this. And we're not making the strategic investments in our economy that actually help to grow the greatest middle class growth in the 50s, 60s, 70s ever. And you and I both know this because we've talked about it. The World Economic Forum looks at like the indices for competitiveness. America used to be at the top in infrastructure, R&D, investments in education. All those things we've been slipping because we're as a country not investing in the things that actually grow our economy.
Do you see, that because the Dems now understand, at least for this one shining moment, that Trump is prepared to cut a deal to give him a win, and he'll do it right in front of his guys.
Right.
He'll do it right in front of the Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin. Doesn't matter at all to him. Are you guys prepared to be more transactional, do you think, to get stuff done, irrespective of, if it looks good for you for a day for credit, why not?
Right. Well, you're ascribing to the Democrats as a whole a group think. For me, there's critical things that I want to get accomplished here. One is just infrastructure in the New Jersey, New York region. We have decaying infrastructure, tunnels under the Hudson, traffic Armageddon in probably one of the most economically productive regions in North America. So I'm looking to try to do things that we can get things accomplished. But let's just not exaggerate what happened here. We have one data point.
We have one data point, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not in any way a pattern.
That surprised a lot of people.
I think it surprised Chuck Schumer. I think it caught him aback. So let's just see. The problem with the Trump administration in these first months, less than a year still, is that you never get a sense that there's a strategy.
True, but we have other data points, right? Another data point is the fact that Trump historically has not been a Republican.
Right.
Another data point is that Trump has been all over the place on ideological issues. And I mean, those are things that, potentially are problematic if you want to talk about things like what America stands for, our values, consistency with allies, but they're potentially quite useful in terms of his popularity is down and suddenly you just need to find a way, give me a life vest, let me get a win, and I don't really care who I get it with.
Well, this is
in that sense, they're patterns.
Yeah, but this is what frightens me about him is, there are friends of mine on the other side of the aisle who I know what their moral rock is. I know where they're grounded and rooted. It may not be the same philosophical perspective I have on the world, which means we conflict a lot, but at least I kind of know where they are and they're predictable. I don't think Trump has that moral compass or that rock. And the one consistency that I've seen since the time he rolled down those escalators to Charlottesville is that he is playing more of a carnival barker, appealing to a very narrow base within the United States of America, which now is the base that he's remaining popular in, which means if he's playing to that base, he's going to continue to be pulled wildly off the spectrum of American political thought into horrific things like we've seen him willing to dog whistle and race bait and the like. So if this was a guy that came in here and said, I just want to make deals to fix healthcare, I want to make deals to fix infrastructure, I want to make deals to give us a tax system that you don't need to have a PhD in economics and a degree from Columbia or Rutgers in tax law. I mean, these are things he could have gotten done. He could have had one of the most productive first years as a president if he came in here and said, I'm going to take the sensible Republicans and go to the Democrats and say, can we put together a deal here? But he's still trapped by a narrow band of our nation, and he's playing to that. He's whipping up the nativist sentiments. He's whipping up the otherness, the bigotry that is unfortunately has now reared its head in an ugly instances.
Now, another place, and the most obvious place when he first became president that he whipped up that base was, of course, on immigration and the Muslim ban, not really a Muslim ban. Then he comes out and says, actually, no, it is a Muslim ban. Right. Now it's come back with the Dreamers and with DACA, and yet there's a flip, right, which is 6 months, I want to help these people, I'm good-hearted, this is a personal dilemma. So let me ask you, Cory, what do you think, if he comes back after all the red meat and says, I want to actually find a way to make these people legal, they did nothing wrong, I want to make this right, I want to keep them here, do you think that there are pieces of immigration that are on his agenda, on the Republican agenda, that the Democrats should actually be willing to bend on?
Listen, my loyalty is always to the people, not to the politics. And what I mean by that is that to save the Dreamers right now, we should all be as a nation focused on that for economic sense, moral sense, American values. There's enough reasons. That's why you have so many Republicans coming out and speaking to it. The problem with immigration reform, right before I came to the Senate, there was a bipartisan immigration reform bill that passed the United States Senate. My senior Senator Bob Menendez played a key role in it. If we had just done that bill, and by the way, there was a lot of things, even Bob said I had to hold my nose, all the money that was being poured into things that he thought shouldn't be poured into, but it would have created billions of dollars to our economic growth, reduced our debt. Economically, it would have put us in a much better place. But what stopped that from passing? It is the demagoguery that you saw with Donald Trump, whipped up the Republican Party, that blocked a sensible bipartisan bill from becoming law. So I still have hope. If your philosophy as an American is grow the economy, forget anything. I just want more jobs for Americans. Well, the first thing you would do is keep the Dreamers here because they're adding to our economy. Even the Cato Institute points to the amount of money they're bringing in. You would understand that one of the most essential economic partners we have is Mexico. Most Americans have no understanding that they are one of our top 3 economic partners on the planet Earth is Mexico. And you start figuring out what ways we can do more partnerships with them, not vilifying them, not weakening our economic bonds and our relationships. It actually helps to create jobs in this country. And you would deal with something that you and I have talked about. we've lost more jobs to microchips than we have to Mexicans. We really have a problem with.
When they start putting microchips in Mexicans, then we're completely screwed.
The biotechnology now is getting incredible. We're going to see some incredible things happening with technology being put in us that will time release medicine and more. But my point is that there are ways to deal with what I think is a real crisis in our country right now: stagnating wages. We are losing jobs to automation. We do have the ill effects of globalization. We've never really focused on the real issues that are making most Americans feel more and more the squeeze. Capitalism has changed in the last 30 years, so different than when my parents worked for both two IBM executives. The big corporations of 2017 are very different than big corporations during the time that we were growing jobs, growing net worth and the like, fissured workplace, the short-termism of using overwhelming 80% of corporate profits to buy back stock and to...
On that wonderful piece in the New York Times the other day that was talking about the difference between
Kodak and
Kodak and Apple,
Yeah.
and that janitors today are not a part of the company. They're outsourced. They don't have the benefits. There's no growth for them.
No, and you're caught. Poverty, which is in a country like this, poverty is an obscenity. And the fact that you have millions of Americans working full-time jobs, catching extra shifts where they can, and they're falling behind and they can't get out of the trap, when that same person willing to work that hard in my parents' generation would have gotten ahead. And that shift in America is what we really need to be dealing with. And that problem allows carnival barkers and demagogues and nativists to come in and whip up the sentiment, misdirect people's rage to Muslims and Mexicans and whatever it is, when really we need to be focusing on what can we do together. We need each other to solve these problems
because
and make
the
the right choices.
establishment, right, has allowed a lot of this to happen and continue for a long time.
The Republican and Democratic parties,
Yes.
Much more, I don't want to create a false equivalency here. The ridiculous of the Republican Party, which is not even the party of Reagan anymore. It's slipped so far to the right. But the reality is the establishments in both parties who have not kept their eye on the ball, which should be, how is an American worker doing in this country? 20 years of stagnant wages with everything else going up, cost of college, cost of childcare, the insecurity in retirement that now people have. They lost sight of that, focusing on other things, and thus we've created this environment where Donald Trump can ascend.
So in this regard, we talked about the immigration issue. There's this big question, right, of the America that you and I grew up in, the melting pot, the Ellis Island, my grandmother came in that way, that now we're saying, no. If you want to come to the United States, you've got to be adding value. And that's not as a human being, just being here and being diverse. That's what are you doing? Because we haven't taken care of our own workers. We need to make sure that you're bringing something. Do you get on board with that? Can you get on board with that?
Hell no, because again, we have such this ahistorical view of our country, this offensive view. I come from a strong Italian and Irish state. If you're Jersey, Italians, Irish families. They didn't come here with PhDs and $500,000 in the bank. This was the wretched refuse of the teeming shore, the words on the Statue of Liberty. These are folks that came here with humility, with nothing, and shaped this country, those waves of immigration. They're added such value to our country. Well, you know what? Indian immigrants, are telling the same story that Irish and Italian immigrants did. Immigrants from Mexico are telling the same story. And by the way, immigrants from Italians to Mexicans, far lower crime rates, far more likely to start businesses and be entrepreneurial and start small businesses, far more likely to make contributions to our economy by doing some of those economic activities. So this idea that we're going to somehow change American history from being a nation that did take the poor, the tired, the hungry, and that entered into this environment and created a catalytic activity within our economies is outrageous to me and offensive and violative of our values as a nation.
And I accept that. But American values, of course, can change.
Yes.
And if you go to Germany, and you think about how people that weren't around during the Cold War never mind those that don't remember the Berlin airlift,
right.
Have a very different view, a much more transactional view of, well, why shouldn't we be doing business, for example, with the Russians? They have a very different view of, well, sort of why is this NATO alliance so important? Why should we be giving to it? And I think that in the United States, there is a very similar feeling. A lot of enlisted men and women and their families saying, this is exactly for what. A lot of young people, a lot of millennials saying this is for what. I'm wondering, to what extent do you think it's appropriate in a changed world and with a new generation that American values and what the country stands for should actually be evolving and adapting?
Well, first of all, we as a country have continuously evolved and adapted, thank God. If you look at our national documents, the founding documents, Native Americans were referred to as savages, African Americans, fractions of human beings, women not referred to at all. Thank God we have evolved in those ways, but let's stick with those founding documents. The question is who are we as a country? And we as a country did not put forth in our founding documents this idea that we were going to be a transactional economic entity. The first ideals we put forward, and by the way, the head of AEI, I love when he talks about this. The ideals what we put forward first are these values. We're the oldest constitutional democracy on the planet Earth, and we talked about things about freedom and liberty, which includes freedom of religion, includes freedom of speech. These universal principles codified in this country that became a light and a model for the planet Earth. Those are worth preserving, and I don't want to compromise those values based upon short-term economic interests. I want to be the country that proves that leading with your ideals and leading with your values creates long-term sustainable growth and prosperity for all. That's the American experiment. That's the American hope. And if we begin to retreat from that globally, if we begin to retreat from our ideals, we lose not only our soul, but I think we become a far darker planet Earth, where we begin to become more nativist, more tribalist, where force and will and even those totalitarian instincts begin to rule the day.
Now you would agree that that is happening to a degree in the United States?
Oh, I agree that we have always in this country wrestled with demagoguery and bigotry and these darker angels that were there at the beginning, shaping our country at the beginning. There was those fights. You have people like Thomas Jefferson trying to push to make slavery illegal. There's been Father Conklin. There's been McCarthyism. Every generation has seen this flare of extremist demagoguery. Every time our economy has dipped from the recessions of the 1870s, when the ideals of Reconstruction were tossed out, to the Depression era, where you did see communism and other things, other extremes. But our country has always found ways to course correct. The best of America has always been able to overcome the worst of America. And so this is one of those times. And I will fight against demagogues and nativists to be who we are. I used to joke, I still joke with some friends, it's ticking me off right now when I see people like Canada and Trudeau try to out-America us, try to show our values to the world, like letting in refugees.
They would argue they're out-Canadaing us at the end of the day, right? I mean,
I love my Canadian brothers and sisters, but
when I was going to the Soviet Union back in the 80s, there were a lot of people that would put sort of maple leaves on their backpacks because they were always seen as kind of really consistent on human rights, while the Americans were, of course, a lot of military internationally.
Well, at the end of the day, I would give America far more credit for the fall of the Iron Curtain than I would to Canada.
That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that, and by the way, I love what a great hemisphere we have.
Oh, come on. Just let's slap the Canadians around a little bit. No, stop it.
Blame Canada.
Yes, that's right.
It is really a bad thing when we make South Park.
By the way, Cory touches me this much, even when we're just in private. Not when we're just so you know, this isn't just for the cameras.
No,
it is true.
No. Okay, let's get away from South Park references.
Okay, fine.
And get back to
the world.
I believe in America, and my you can't see it around here, but from Frederick Douglass to Johann Prince, Rabbi Prince, Martin Luther King. I mean, I surround myself with what I think we stand for as a country, and that our own internal struggles has been created heat and warmth for the world as we've lurched and fought and zigzagged our way forward as a nation. And what we've brought to this country, to this globe, innovations in health, in technology, space travel, all of these things have been birthed from American ingenuity, American idealism, and people want to pervert it. It's not rugged individualism, which is an important American value, but rugged individualism didn't get us to the moon. It didn't map the human genome. These are Americans figuring out ways to work together despite our differences, this heterogeneous nation, to show the planet Earth what the future looks like.
Do you think that America should appropriately be promoting those values outside our borders?
Yes, I'm one of those people that
You're one of those guys that says democracy, rule of law, the U.S. is not just leading by example, but we need to be telling other countries this is what you need to do.
No, see again, do I think we should be representing those values? I'm one of these guys that has a saying, before you tell me about your religion, first show it to me and how you treat other people.
Sure.
And so...
And that's frankly where many countries around the world believe,
right,
and with good reason.
Right, but I do think
the United States has fallen down.
Yeah, look, if we're not wrestling with, our...
And that's where the Canadians are showing us up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, and we need to wrestle with our relationship with Saudi Arabia, for example. Is it just a utilitarian, what can we do? Or do we need to wrestle with what they're doing now in Yemen? Do we need to wrestle with what they're doing with women?
Which we're supporting in terms of Yemen.
And which is why I voted against certain arms going when our own military people were pulling out of targeting centers because they were seeing what they were doing. When we go to China, are we just going to think of our utilitarian objectives, or are we going to talk about human rights issues? This is what, if we're not wrestling with this about how best to deal with those problems abroad, and by the way, we have human rights issues right here in this country, what we do with juvenile solitary confinement in our prisons. I mean, our prisons are human rights, in my opinion, human rights offenses in and of themselves in the way we've been conducting ourselves. So if we're not having this struggle internationally and locally about our values, then we're not making progress as a nation. As soon as you stop that struggle, I think you begin to retreat in the assertion and the manifestation of who you are.
Now, a lot of young people around the world are watching this. And,
we've got a major youth bubble on the planet Earth.
Which, yeah, there's no question. And one of the things that I find most disturbing when I talk to these brilliant young people is how few of them would remotely consider the kind of career that you have chosen for yourself. And
yes.
you're a great example of exactly the kind of person that we really need to see far more of in public service. If you're talking to someone in school right now or going through college, thinking about their career, without the grand verbiage, just why would someone like that really consider that? What's it given you that makes you say this is something that was the right path?
Look, I've never felt more fulfilled in my life than when I'm engaged in service. I mean, it's just as simple as that. Why are we on this planet Earth? If not to make the best out of ourselves as possible and to give back. So I mean, I get up every day and I have even when I was mayor of the city of Newark, every day I get up and I get to make it my purpose of trying to make a difference in people's lives, education, healthcare, you name it. And so, you don't have to be in government to do that. I think that you're a private business person, but you're struggling with issues every single day that make a difference in the lives of people. I just think that forget about life is about purpose, not position. And we need to, all of us should be thinking to ourselves, why am I taking up space on this planet? And I hope that all of us within our core purpose believe in our heart that one of our parts of our core purpose has got to be making a difference in the world around us. And sometimes that's raising amazing kids with great values of charity, kindness, decency, and love. Sometimes it's just being a volunteer in community programs and nonprofits around you. But all of us have got to be doing something. And then the other thing I don't care what your purpose is we've got to be self-critical and humble. Where are the clothes we're wearing? Are they being made in a way that is violating our core values or supporting them? The food we're eating, is it being made in a way that's hurting the planet Earth or helping the planet? I mean, it's just being a humble servant of humanity, because humanity is facing a lot of challenges and in many ways in crisis. And are you going to be someone, when you leave this earth, that you left it a little better or left it worse?
Okay, Mr. Cory, it's always a pleasure.
It's my
spend
pleasure.
some
Yeah.
time with you. This is kind of a fun thing to do to kind of kick off this new series that we have, and I suspect we're going to be talking to each other.
I suspect we're not going
A
to
lot
be allowed
more.
to go to Canada.
That sounds perfect.
We'll
Cory
be stopped
Booker.
at the border.
Thanks a lot, man.
All right, thank you.
Talk to you soon.
All right.